Hey there, welcome to Mike's Collection, episode 162. I'm Mike, and the part of my collection that I'm going to be talking about today is some of my G.I. Joe Classified figures. So G.I. Joe Classified is Hasbro's new-ish line of 6-inch G.I. Joe figures. And it launched, I would say, maybe midway through 2020. And it started with Wave 1, which I think was 6 figures, and those figures were available at regular retail. So you could find them at Walmart or Target or comic book stores or wherever. And then Wave 2, Wave 3 have come out since. The figures came out pretty steadily throughout 2021. Most subsequent waves were smaller. It was only like 2 or 3 figures a piece. And they've been not too difficult for me to collect. But the problem has been, almost since the very beginning, G.I. Joe Classified introduced a line of exclusives which were only available at Target stores. And my understanding is, even if you live close to a Target, it still can be pretty difficult to track these figures down. But for me, I live in Canada and we don't have Targets. Now, that doesn't mean it's necessarily impossible for me to get these exclusives, because often Target exclusives show up at Toys R Us here in Canada, which we still have. But even that, they've been very difficult. This subset, these Target exclusives, are called Cobra Island, or Special Missions Cobra Island. So in order for me to collect these figures, I have had to usually either go to sites like eBay, or I've gone on Facebook Marketplace, things like that. There's not an easy way for me to buy them, and I'm usually paying marked up prices, which kind of sucks. But thus far, I've pretty much got pretty much all of them. So you see here, you get the standard box. This is what most G.I. Joe Classified figures look like, except it has that Special Missions Cobra Island logo. And instead of the standard graphic on the back, which shows all the characters in the line, it's got this picture of Cobra Island with all these highlighted portions of the island kind of magnified to show you, I guess, different attack points or whatever G.I. Joe is planning on attacking. So there he is inside the box. We're going to pop this guy open and take a look at him. And we're going to take a look at the other G.I. Joe Classified figures. Some of them, I did shoot some footage of them in the box when I got them. So that is, some of that's a couple of months old, but you'll see I'll insert that in there as I get to those figures. So anyway, without further ado, let's take a look at these Classified figures. So let's first take a look at Roadblock now that I've got him outside of the packaging. So my first impression of this figure is that it's a really nice figure. My only problem with it would be, and the only reason why I considered not even buying it in the first place, was because it doesn't really look like any iteration of Roadblock we've ever gotten before. But having said that, it's still like a really nice sculpt and some really nice detail on there. Like, I like this head sculpt with the beard. I can't say I particularly love the weird earpiece, but I don't have a problem with it. The bandana. The shirt I think would be cool, except for the G.I. Joe logo, which I think makes it kind of corny. I'm guessing probably from the waist down, these are probably all shared parts. These are probably the same pants we saw on Duke and maybe the previous version of Roadblock here. But it's a nice sculpt. I'm just curious. I really don't know. I obviously don't have the numbers on this, and Hasbro probably does. And, you'd like to assume Hasbro is making informed decisions, but it often seems like they're not. But why make this character Roadblock? Maybe they know that Roadblock is a household name now that Dwayne Johnson played him in a movie and everything. So even though they've already released another version of Roadblock, which probably a lot of people already had because that one came out first, they think, we can sell this figure if we call him Roadblock because people like this character. Whereas I would think, when G.I. Joe was at the height of its popularity in the 80s, they didn't have to re-release Snake Eyes and Duke and Roadblock 1,000 times over. The fun of G.I. Joe and what people were excited about was all the new characters being added to the line every year. So if I can understand so here's Roadblock, by the way. So this is the Wave 1 Roadblock. So if they wanted to repaint this, this figure here in different colors, absolutely. Roadblock version 1, version 2. Nice and cheap to do. Maybe they want to give him a whole new vest. Maybe give him a new hat. There you go. Roadblock version 3. But when you go so far as to sculpt a whole new head sculpt with character features like a full bushy beard that Roadblock has never had before, it would be so easy to call this character Heavy Duty or give him a whole new name and make him a brand new character. And I think that would be pretty exciting because we haven't had any brand new characters added to G.I. Joe in a while. So, why don't you make this guy a whole new guy? Then I would have rushed out to get him rather than kind of sitting on this and thinking, well, if I don't get him, I don't get him. It's just another Roadblock. So I don't really know what's the better method. Again, I assume Hasbro maybe knows that Roadblocks sell better than non-Roadblocks. I don't know. But, I like this figure quite a bit as a unique character. So for accessories, he came with the same gun that the version 1 Roadblock did. It's a little less science fiction-y looking as far as the colors go, but it's still a pretty weird gun. I don't think it's based on anything in the real world. And then the other accessory he had are these little sunglasses. So I'm not sure how they're going to fit on him. So let's gear him up and see how he looks. So here he is all geared up. So he holds the gun, of course, in the same way as this Roadblock holds his gun. Now I will say I wasn't able. I didn't put a whole lot of effort into it, but I was trying to get this secondary handle, I guess whatever you call it, into his hand. But this plastic is really soft on the gun, and trying to squeeze that into his hand, I was worried I'd almost break that off. Like the hand is harder plastic than the gun, which is kind of odd. And I might need to heat his hand up a little bit to open his hand a little bit. So I'm sure it will fit in there if I wrestle with it a little bit. But right now, I just don't have access to a hair dryer handy. And I don't have the fingernails right now to really kind of pry at his fingers there. So whatever. So I'm sure he holds the gun the same way. So besides the paint job, I'm also noticing it says broiler on the side of the gun. I don't know where that come from. Maybe that is a common slang term for a certain type of gun. I don't know. But again, it seems a little cheesy that Roadblock would paint that on the side of his gun. The sunglasses, they fit on his head quite nice. There's actually little discreet holes on the side of his head, one of them on the side of this earpiece, so it tucks in there. So not only do they fit quite nicely, but they actually stay in place. So you can shake them around, put them upside down, and those sunglasses stay on there pretty good. So that's pretty cool. While I was fidgeting around with him, getting the gun in his hand, I did notice that the sculpt on this figure does appear to be pretty much the exact same as the previous Roadblock. So you'll notice they both have the one knee pad. Even the boots with the shin guards that a lot of people really didn't like on the Wave 1 figures, they kept those on there, but it's amazing how just painting them solid black can kind of make them go away. You don't even really notice them there. He's got the pockets on the side of his jeans. On this leg here, he still has the pocket, but they've added this removable piece here with some extra, grenades or something there. So that kind of adds a little bit of difference to him. And the torso, I think it's probably the exact same torso that this guy has. It's missing the vest, but you'll notice there's no sculpted wrinkles or anything in this, so it doesn't really look like it was intended to be a shirt. It's very smooth, so that he could just be bare-chested, which is what this Roadblock is underneath of this vest, I believe. So without any sculpting or anything, they just pretty much took this guy's body from the neck down, repainted it, and then gave him a new head sculpt. So I think it's a pretty successful repaint. They look pretty different despite being pretty much the same figure, for 90% of the figure, same accessory and everything. But I think these guys totally look like two different characters, and that's what I want in this particular case. So I can display him as Roadblock and him as Heavy Duty. So the next Cobra Island figure we're going to look at is another Wave 1 figure. This is Beachhead. Now, Beachhead is a really cool character. This guy, was featured pretty prominently in the cartoons. I know he was in the comic books, but I can't think off the top of my head of any real prominent storylines in the comic book for him. But anyway, this was a character I really liked as a kid. But this is one of the toys that my brother Doug owned when we were growing up. So I've talked about this many times before, but I have a brother that's 2 years older than me, and we collected pretty much everything jointly. So I would collect half the line, he would collect half the line, and we would play together. Beachhead is one of the characters that Doug had, and so even though he's a character I really like, I don't have the same personal attachment to him as I do with some other characters that I got to play with growing up. Anyway, I think this is a pretty successful redo of Beachhead in the 6-inch line. So Beachhead, his main trademark is having that green ski mask, and it looks a little different here. It's got that like kind of ribbing, running across it, which it kind of always has. But what's different here is he's got this kind of different material over his mouth and nose, which I guess would make it a little bit more breathable, which is probably something that realistically a soldier would wear these days. I don't know, but it makes sense, and I think it looks all right. Now, an interesting side note, you'll notice here with his eyes, I guess I have his eyes almost look gray. But there were two variations of this. I think people describe them as the blue-eyed and the brown-eyed. And I'm not sure which one is rarer. But some people that are real completists were trying to chase down both versions. I don't really care which color eyes Beachhead has. But yeah, it's kind of weird that they look gray on this particular one. Anyway, so yeah, he's got the sweater. And he's got the cool patches on the elbows that run right down to his wrist and everything. Got some pouches on there. Then he's got this vest over top. And then, yeah, boots, pants. I can't be certain that these are the same. The pants look like they might be the same. Like some of these parts are probably shared with Roadblock. You can see the pocket on the side of the pants here hidden underneath of this holster. But then he does have 2 knee pads, which Roadblock didn't. So he's got some different pieces there. And the boots, it's hard to tell. They might be the same boots, but he's got this added shin guard, which kind of changes the look of them. So overall, pretty cool. For accessories, he's got this green knife, which can be sheathed there on his boot, which is pretty cool. Although, I do wish it had a silver blade, and really I'd rather have a black handle too. Like, I don't think there's too many fully green knives out there, and it looks a little silly. Same as he's got a pistol, which can be holstered here. And same thing, it's fully green. Which, fine, if you're not going to paint the accessories, I have no problem with that. But then sculpt them in black. I'm not a fan of these colored accessories. And then his gun here as well. I'm not sure what type of gun this is, but we'll just call it his machine gun. That is also fully green. I don't love it. It looks a little cartoony. He also had this crossbow, which I don't think it's the same one that comes with Scarlet, so that's kind of bizarre that they would give him his own like uniquely sculpted crossbow, because I don't think he's ever had one in any prior iterations. The reason why I don't think it's Scarlet's is because my Scarlet crossbow is constantly falling apart, but this one seems to be one sculpted piece rather than have this be separate. So yeah, if that's the case, I wish they used this piece with Scarlet, because I really get annoyed when Scarlet's crossbow is constantly falling apart. And the one other accessory he has here, well, I guess he has a backpack too, which I should mention. Nothing special there. It shows that he's got some arrows for his crossbow and everything, which is a cool little detail. I'm not sure what this thing is, but he's got the backpack, and then he's got this beret, which is removable. And I thought for sure I would be displaying him without the beret, but I've kind of gotten used to it. And I kind of like it on there. So, and it saves me having to go throw it in the spare parts bin. So I think I will probably keep it on there. But that is a new look for Beachhead. He has never had a beret in the past in all the prior versions. Now, I do not have the original Beachhead that came out in the 80s, because like I said, my brother had it. But I do have a repaint of that figure. He was released in kind of like Night Force colors some years later. So here is my version of the vintage Beachhead. So I believe this figure is pretty much the same as the original, just with the new color scheme. So you see it's a little different because he's got a black ski mask, which is different for Beachhead, but again, if it's Night Force, I guess that makes sense. So yeah, he never had a beret before, so I think a lot of people thought it was odd that he had it in the 6-inch line, and I never would have known this in all the years that me and my brother had Beachhead figures and played with Beachhead figures. I never thought twice about what this thing on his shoulder was, and I only saw people commenting on Facebook when this figure came out, and people were commenting that it was stupid that he had a beret. People were saying, well, he has a beret, it's always been strapped to his shoulder in pretty much every version of the figure that's ever come out. And I was like, oh, is that what that red thing is? I just kind of thought it was like maybe a piece of rope or something, but yeah, so that makes more sense, and that's kind of cool. So you can see how well they kind of translated from the vintage to this new classified version. Now I do have a couple other versions here. In the early 2000s, during what we call the new sculpt era, there were all kinds of different Beachheads released. So here's one of those. This version of Beachhead I didn't love. Like, the look carries over okay, but in the original 80s cartoon, he kind of had a personality like he was a really kind of hard-ass like drill sergeant. And then in this era, they made some computer animated movies, and they treated Beachhead like he was a surfer dude or something. It was really kind of a pretty big departure for the character. And then as far as the modern era of G.I. Joes, I have quite a few different versions of Beachhead. So here are just a few of the modern versions of Beachhead. They released multiple ones, but as you can see here, they all kind of stuck with the same basic theme. These ones here are very true to the original as far as the coloring. He's got the brown camo with the green. The shade of green is very close to the vintage figure. And you'll notice on all these figures, he has that red beret tucked up on his shoulder there. I think this is probably the best modern Beachhead. This is from the 50th anniversary line. Very cool. But even these versions that strayed a little bit as far as colors go, you know, this is a little bit more like maybe a desert looking version of him. He's very kind of plain, subdued colors. This one here, it's pretty close to his original look, but just, again, the colors are kind of muted on here and probably a little bit more real world. I think if you were going to go sneaking through the jungles, you'd probably want to be dressed more like this than like this. But yeah, I like the bright colors on this guy, so yeah, he's my favorite. So even though I really wanted this Beachhead, and it took a little bit of effort to seek him out, I did end up buying him off of somebody on Facebook, and I paid a premium for him. I was well aware that I could probably wait, and they would probably re-release this. And if they do re-release it, I wouldn't be surprised if they re-release it in this color scheme, which I would actually prefer. So, you know, I could have taken the chance and just not bought this thing and just waited for them to release a better version. But at the same time, I didn't want to risk it. And, you know, it could be a couple of years before they put out that version of him. So at least for now, I'm glad I picked up this Beachhead. I think he's a pretty cool figure. Wave 1 of the Cobra Island exclusives consisted of the Roadblock, the Beachhead, then it was Baroness with the motorcycle, and a Cobra Trooper. Now, I'm not going to spend too much time on these guys because these figures I've previously talked about in other videos. So this Baroness, it's a great figure. I really like it. I think it's the best Baroness figure they've ever done. This was also very hard for me to track down. I had to put in a lot of effort of checking Toys R Us website in multiple locations every day, refreshing it. You know, really was not easy to track down. However, it seems to have become much easier to find. I was in Toys R Us the other day when I picked up that Roadblock, and they must have had 40 or 50 of these figures on the shelf. So I guess it's just a matter of patience in some scenarios. However, now that it's finally readily available, Hasbro just recently announced that they're going to re-release this figure on a single pack. So I had to pay about $60 to get this Baroness with the motorcycle, which I didn't really want or need the motorcycle. If you wanted the motorcycle, great. But if you don't need the motorcycle, you can get this figure for just $30 on its own pretty soon. It's the exact same, except all these gray parts, they've painted them black. So it's pretty much a solid black outfit with just a couple of Cobra emblems, I believe. I'm not sure I'll bother getting the single pack version, just because I think this one is so successful. Like, I don't mind that extra bit of gray on there, even though Baroness traditionally has worn solid black. I think it kind of breaks up the design a little bit, and I kind of like it. I think the glasses on the newer version are also going to be solid black with these little gold bits. But again, I don't think that detracts from the figure at all. So yeah, it's up to you if you want to seek this figure out. It seems to be getting easier and easier to find. But if you want to just wait, there will be a single pack version later. The single pack version will probably have the same pistols and the same knife that she's got here. It probably won't have this weird robotic Cobra accessory that she came with, which I have coiled around her arm because I don't know what else to do with it. She also has an alternate head that has a motorcycle helmet on it. I'm pretty sure you wouldn't get that in the single pack version since there's no motorcycle. But yeah, so it's up to you, I guess, what you think you want to do. But it's a great figure, so I definitely recommend you get some version of it, whether it's this one or the newer one. And then with the Cobra Trooper, this here is a bit of a cheat. I don't have the Cobra Island Cobra Trooper, but they re-released that figure as a standard figure. Again, it's really solid. This one, actually both of these figures, the Cobra Trooper and the Baroness, made my best of 2021 list. I think they're both incredible figures. As you can see here, he's got a couple of pistols. They can be holstered on him. He's got a knife sheathed here. He's got another rifle. He's got these kind of like holes that you can plug the weapons into him so you can store them multiple places. His helmet's removable, so you get multiple looks options, and the helmet stays on him quite well. It doesn't fall off. It's got that nice snug fit. So yeah, I was content with the retail version. However, with the Cobra Island version, I think it might have come with some different guns, but the main thing it came with that was different is he had a set of goggles that you could put down over his eyes that kind of gave him this snake-eyed look. And I don't mean snake eyes, I mean like actual snake eyes. They were kind of cool looking goggles. He also had an armband that you could put over his arm that I guess would signify a higher rank. I would have thought that the armband would have allowed you to make this a Cobra officer, but they've already announced that they are going to release a Cobra officer figure down the line. So in that case, I really don't know what the armband would have signified on one Cobra Trooper over another. But anyway, I think there were some slight repaint differences too, where you see he's basically a blue color on the base, and then his vest is also just a darker blue. I believe the vest was black on the Cobra Island figure. So if I see one, I'll definitely grab one. But yeah, I'm not going to pay crazy prices to seek that one out, because we'll probably get this same figure painted multiple colors with slight variations, you know, over the next several years. So yeah, I wouldn't go nuts paying big bucks for the Target exclusive one when these guys are a lot more easy to find. So next up, we'll take a look at Firefly. So I believe we would classify him as Cobra Island Wave 2. I think it was him and Major Bludd that kind of came out as the next exclusives. Anyway, this is a pretty cool figure. Firefly, he's another fan favorite character. He was featured very heavily in the comic books. He's the Cobra Saboteur. This was a character that my brother Doug had when we were kids. So again, I don't have that same personal attachment because I didn't get to play with this guy and, you know, kind of create his personality on my own when I was a kid. But how could you not love Firefly? He's a character. I've gotten many figures of him in the years since my childhood, and I'm really glad to have him added to the classified line. So I know a lot of people were skeptical about this figure when it was first shown. This vest, people really didn't like. That seemed to be the main point. It is a lot. It's a pretty big, bulky vest. It kind of reminds me of the, you know, what the bomb disposal guys in the Hurt Locker would wear, which makes total sense if you're going to be planting bombs and stuff, that you might want to wear armor like this to protect yourself. But it's just not like anything we've seen on Firefly before, and it feels a little bulky. Because this guy's also kind of been, you know, he's been sold as a ninja in the past and stuff, and I just feel this big bulky vest would kind of slow him down in his hand-to-hand combat. Probably the greatest thing about this figure is the head sculpt. So not only is the eyes painted pretty crazy, but they're sculpted with like that scarring around the eyes. So this guy has definitely had something blow up in his face before, and he looks pretty nuts. Very maniacal face sculpt. And similar to Beachhead, he's got the mask with the ribbing, but then he's got that different texture over his mouth and nose, which would allow him to breathe a little easier, I guess. So nice sculpting throughout. He's got the lined vest you see there. It looks like he's got the same arms. He's probably got the whole same torso as Beachhead with this kind of ribbed sweater. As far as the legs go, I'm not sure if these are repeat legs as well. Let's see, there's no pockets on the sides. These might be new pieces. And it's always nice to get new parts just to diversify your collection a little bit. But that's the kind of thing that I don't really care that much about. If they reuse the same legs on pretty much every character, as long as they're painted different, I'm not really going to notice that much. You know, unique head sculpts, unique web gear, that's what really makes a figure stand out. So I think this is a pretty successful Firefly. For accessories, he has, let's see, so you see he's got, I might not have all of his accessories handy. I can't remember everything he came with because I've had this guy for a while now. And this was another one that was difficult to track down. I had to pay a hefty price for this figure on Facebook Marketplace because I could not find him in stores. I still have not seen him in stores anywhere after about a year of him being released. So he's got that. He's got these goggles. Again, the goggles are not something that Firefly has had traditionally, but I think they kind of help with this look. Like without them, he looks really bulky with that vest. I find the goggles just kind of help tie it together a little bit. I don't know why, but I do. He also has this backpack with some like dynamite charges there on the bottom, which can be plugged in there like so. And then he has this little drone, which is pretty cool. When I think of Firefly in the past, I don't think him using explosive drones has been something that he has traditionally done, but it was something that he definitely did in the live action movie G.I. Joe Retaliation. If you recall, he had little Firefly drones that could blow things up. So this is kind of a cool little nod to that, I guess, is where this comes from. So here he is next to the vintage Firefly figure. So I did not have this figure in the 80s. My brother did, but I have since acquired this version, and it's a pretty nice version. He's got both of his thumbs are intact, his crotch piece isn't broken off, so he's in pretty good condition, other than the fact that his washer, which is the little rubber elastic that holds vintage G.I. Joes together, is broken, and that's the case on so many of my vintage G.I. Joes. So I've kind of just got him balancing here, but you see he's very easy to just come apart because there's that broken elastic. But anyway, yeah, you see with the sculpting. So on the vintage figure, it didn't have the ribbing on his mask per se, but you can see on the kind of the neck of his sweater, he had that ribbed sweater. Otherwise, he's got some grenades, some explosives, but he has that gray camo. And so, yeah, that's all carried over quite well into this new version. During the new sculpt years of the early 2000s, there were multiple Fireflies released. This here is my favorite one. So this figure has the exact same body as the vintage figure. You'll notice the same grenades, the same like stripy turtleneck there. So that's all the same. The paint scheme is pretty much the same, except it's a little bit lighter. The backpack was the same. His gun was the same. He still came with a little handheld phone. So we had all the same accessories. The only thing they really changed, other than the paintwork, was they gave him a brand new head sculpt. And I really like this head sculpt. As much as I love the vintage figure there, he's kind of dead-eyed. Most G.I. Joes and the vintage figures didn't have any whites painted in their eyes. They had these kind of very standard... Let me grab him again. These very kind of just unemotional, very plain-faced look. Whereas this guy here, he just looks a little bit more... He's got a little bit more personality with the eyebrows and the whites in his eyes. So he's also got the kind of a furrowed brow. So it makes him look a little angrier. So yeah, I think this was a really successful head sculpt to add on an already like really cool body sculpt from the vintage figure. So this was a really nice update. And here you see some variations of the modern Firefly. So like Beachhead, every figure was unique. It was just unique enough to make me go and buy another one. But he kept his same look most of the time. So that gray camo, so this here I think was the first modern Firefly they released. He's very true to the vintage one. This one here is probably my favorite, although the colors are reversed. So he's like a darker gray with lighter camo patches. And then this one here, you see the camo on the body, but it doesn't carry over to the mask. So that's a little bit of a different look. And this one here, he's got almost like some green on him. This is from the movie line, so he had a little different look too with the leather jacket. So yeah, he's had a lot of looks, all very similar. But yeah, I think this figure here is really cool. So next up, we've got Major Bludd. Now this was a character that I had as a kid. I always really liked this guy. So I'm very happy to get an update of him in the new classified line. I think this figure looks great. Kind of like with Firefly. It's in this scale where the sculptors have a little bit more room to work, they can add in some more personality into the face. So with Firefly, it made perfect sense that his face would be a little scarred up from past explosives. With Major Bludd, he's like a mercenary. He's been through some shit, so his face really shows that. And it's also really cool that you get a chance to remove his helmet. So we have got that, I think, once or twice on the smaller figures, but it's not super common to have the removable helmet. So here you can see his hair. He's got that little white streak in the front. His face is really scarred up. Where he used to wear more of a traditional like pirate eye patch, here it's got like more of a It almost looks like a technical implant or something over his eye. So that's pretty cool. Now he's got the dog tags, which he's always had. These are not as successful as I'd like. I find they kind of rest a little heavy up on the collar. They don't really sit the way I would like them to. But still, it's cool that they're, a separately sculpted piece. And you can see how many he's got there. So those aren't his dog tags. These are the dog tags that he has collected off of his fallen enemies. So that's kind of a cool little, personality trait of this guy. The face sculpt, I think, not only sculpted nice, but the paintwork. Like, look at how successful that 5 o'clock shadow is on his chin. Like, it's just a small little detail, but I think it looks really great. And then the armor, it's all very cool. He's got a lot of unique pieces in there, I believe. Especially this arm. He's always had one arm, which was oftentimes debated whether it was a mechanical arm or a armored arm. I don't know if Hasbro has outright said one way or the other, but this definitely looks robotic. It does not look like, as thick as his other arm would be. You'd expect him to have an armored arm. It would be, a little thicker than this, but this one seems to be thinner, so it definitely speaks to it being a robotic arm. And then as far as the pants, probably the same pieces we've seen before, but I don't know. They might be unique. Some nice texturing in there. So overall, a really cool figure. So he's got that removable helmet. He's got this weird little gun, which is a nod to his vintage gun that he always had. You can see how it's kind of fallen from his hand there. He does hold it, but it is a little loose in his grip. Then he's got the dog tags. He's got another gun here, holstered on his leg. Now it has some paint apps, which is nice. So they added that little silver bit, so it's not completely black. Let me see, does he have a knife or anything? No knife for this guy, but he does have a backpack. And this is a little frustrating for me, is that he's got these little rockets, or whatever you call them, that go on the back of his backpack. And those have always been there since the vintage figure. And you can see I've got one of them kind of plugged in at the end of the gun there. So otherwise you can take that off of the gun, and it's a much smaller piece. But when you add it, it kind of gives it the look of the vintage gun. So I think it's cool that they gave us those removable arrows, but they're very loose. This thing is constantly falling out of his backpack. Like, it doesn't snap into place. And I've tried storing it pointing upright, pointing downwards, whatever. It always just comes tumbling out. So right now I'm impressed that it's holding a little bit, but it doesn't do that very well. So that's my biggest gripe about this Major Bludd figure. But otherwise, I think he's pretty sweet. So now here is the vintage Major Bludd figure. So you see here, he's still got that black helmet design with the eye patch, the mustache, the dog tags around his neck. So all those elements carried over. It's just a lot less detailed. Now Major Bludd isn't completely broken in two, but he's on the verge. The elastic is snapped, and it's just a matter of time of him falling apart. He'll probably fall apart during the course of this review. Anyway, so you can see with, even dating back to the original figure, the one arm, it has no articulation, so you couldn't bend it at the elbow, which was all other G.I. Joes could do. They had this elbow, and they also had the swivel. So the fact that he had this stiff arm, it did speak to it being like mechanical, or maybe it was like some sort of cast or something. I don't know. But yeah, cool figure. Again, you can see on the backpack, it's got those arrows, but they were sculpted in at this point. They didn't come out. So pretty cool figure, and the look carries over quite nicely. Now there were other versions of Major Bludd in the vintage line. This here is one of my favorites. So it retains the same look, the same color scheme. He's still got the same backpack. I just think everything is just kind of like a little better sculpted. You can see he's got the white in his eyes. He looks more like a real person. I like the addition of all these grenades all over him. It looks pretty intense. This figure here is actually from the year 2000. So it kind of, it's hard to know where to classify this one. It's a little earlier than the new sculpt era, which kind of began in 2002. But it doesn't really tie into the Real American Hero era of the 80s and 90s, because that kind of ended in 94. He was part of just like a small line. I think it was a Toys R Us exclusive of a couple of 2-packs and 3-packs that they put out over the course of like the late 90s and 2000 and such. So yeah, he might have been missed by a lot of collectors because he wasn't released at a time when there were a lot of G.I. Joe figures available, but I think it's a really cool figure. Now, here's another version of Major Bludd that was released in the early 90s, and I think this one is not so successful. This one, you still get the helmet and the eye patch and the mustache and everything, but this is just not a good look. I would not recommend that Hasbro repaint this figure in these colors. I really don't think that would be necessary. As far as modern versions of Major Bludd go, here are a couple of them. I think there were a couple more, but these are the first two I grabbed. As you can see, the look is very consistent. The black, brown, the helmet, the eye patch, all that stuff. The shape of the gun, again, you can see that it's got that same look. Again, you know what? Actually, I think the missiles are a separate piece on this figure because they have this elastic holding them on there, so that's interesting. But the shape of the gun's the same. He still has the arm. He can't move at the elbow, so they retained that whole thing all throughout. A lot of personality in this guy's face with the kind of the snarling teeth. So yeah, very cool. Here's another one. He's got the loose dog tags there as well. So, all these elements of the character have been retained pretty much through all the different versions over time. And yeah, they're all pretty great. I really like this character. And I think the new classified version does Major Bludd justice. So next up, let's take a look at the Cobra Viper. And as usual, I am running long, so I'm going to try and speed up and talk a little quicker about some of these figures. So the Viper, this is kind of Cobra's infantryman, and it was their second attempt at the infantry. So in the very first wave of G.I. Joes in 1982, you had the Cobra Trooper and the Cobra Officer, which are the basic, what are called blue shirts, and they were Cobra's infantry. Now there have been many different trooper types released over the years, but most of the Cobra characters that came out in those early years were individual characters. So you had Storm Shadow, you had Firefly, Major Bludd, Baroness. And the blue shirts were supposed to be the backbone of Cobra's army. And it was really when this character came out. This guy was a little souped up. He had bigger guns, this armored vest. He was more colorful. He had this visor, which was a little bit more in line with what Cobra Commander was wearing. It was a really cool upgrade to the Cobra infantry. And then these guys started replacing the blue shirts in a lot of scenes in the cartoons and the comic books and whatnot. So the Viper is very cool, and after they did the Viper, then pretty much every Cobra Trooper that came out afterwards was some variation of the Viper. You had Alley Vipers and Hydro Vipers and Heat Vipers and Night Vipers and pretty much everything under the sun, and this guy started it all. So very cool figure, like this guy a lot. Now this, as far as the sculpt on this guy, I think he looks great. It's very true to the vintage Viper figure. But I do have one complaint right out of the gate. Well, maybe two. So for one, the Viper design has always been kind of weird in that he wears this full face shield, but he has goggles strapped onto the top of his helmet. And in the vintage figure, they were just part of the sculpt. And, that was fine. Lots of G.I. Joes had lots of pieces that were just sculpted onto them, whether it was guns or knives or something. They weren't functional pieces. It just kind of added to the sculpt of the figure. They kind of got away from that in later years, and most of the knives and guns and stuff were removable pieces that you could actually, take out. But certain pieces, I don't think you needed to do that, and these goggles are one of those things. Starting in the modern era of G.I. Joes, they started sculpting the goggles as a separate piece, but it's really annoying because they just fall off. I've been showing you how everything else stays on really well. These do not. They're very loose. They don't click into place anywhere. And they also, for one, I don't know why a Viper would ever need to wear goggles over top of his visor. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And this strap isn't big enough for him to even do that as an option. He can't put this down over his eyes. So why make it a separate piece? It drives me nuts because every time I handle this guy, the goggles are falling off. And they used to do that all the time in the modern era figures, and that really bothered me. So you'd think they might have learned from their mistakes and either sculpted these as part of the helmet or made them so that they locked into place, made the strap wide enough so it could come down over the officer's eyes like that. But as it stands, it's just kind of an annoying little piece. The other thing I don't really like is this kind of scarf or neckerchief he's wearing there. It's cool that it's there as an option. It feels a little bulky. I'd like to maybe have the option to get rid of it, which you could do if you pop his head off. And let's do that now maybe. if we pop his head off here. So there you go. If you pop the head off, now you've got that exposed skin on his neck, and I just don't really like the way that looks. I wish maybe he had either red or blue or black that came right up to the helmet. I don't know why. It's just my personal preference. I don't like the skin tone showing there. But anyway, so that's the Viper. It's a cool sculpt. Now let's do some comparisons to some previous versions. So here is the vintage Viper figure from the 80s. And like this was a really solid design from the get-go. And you can see how faithful they've stuck to this design to the new version here. So there's the helmet with the goggles. Doesn't make sense, but the goggles are sculpted as part of the helmet, so they don't fall off. But the black vest with the red and the grenades, this figure here still has all that. The vest retains a lot of that same look. He's got the really high boots, just like this guy. He's got some of that red piping on the side of his pants. I don't know why it doesn't carry over through the figure. Like you see here, the red stripe runs down the whole length except for the pocket. And that's the case on both sides here. But they didn't do that on this figure. It's just the top part. And then you've got it on the inside of the leg. Again, it's not complete. It's a weird choice the way they've done that. But yeah, anyway. And the other major choice difference there is that this guy has short sleeves and this guy has the full sleeve. I think the full sleeve makes sense. But here you'll see how he's got the blue comes right up to the helmet. That's what I would have liked to have seen on this figure here instead of the scarf. The scarf is a nice addition. That way if you buy this figure 2 or 3 times, you can give a scarf to 1 or 2 of them to differentiate the characters. But I wish that the flesh tone wasn't showing there. Now, in the new sculpt years, we had a couple of different variations of the Viper. And this one here is the closest rendition to this look here. And I really like this one here. The proportions were often pretty goofy in the new sculpt years, but I think it works pretty well on him. Like, sure, his legs are kind of long, his torso's kind of small, and his arms are maybe a little long. But I think the head is a nice proportion. Oftentimes the heads on the vintage figures were kind of big. But here I think he looks really cool. I really like this look. Again, you see the goggles sculpted to the top. He retains the same color, a lot of the same, design with the kind of that leg. I want to stop saying ribbed all the time, but again, I'm just going to use that again. So that kind of ribbed design on the inside of the leg. And so the vest, even though it's a different kind of vest, still got some grenades on there. So a very cool look. This figure they released in a couple different color schemes. So here's the same figure, and pretty much with the same color scheme as well, still with the black, red, and blue. But you see they've added some silver. And this is kind of cool because with the silver Cobra emblem as opposed to the red, you could kind of say, even though I don't think it was distinguished this way on the file cards, but this was a Viper officer and that was a Viper trooper. That would just be in line with going all the way back to 1982, where the Cobra trooper had a red logo and the Cobra officer had silver. And then we got that same design again in Python Patrol colors. So again, another really cool look, totally different color scheme, but I like this one a lot. And we're actually slated to get a Python Patrol version of this figure coming out later this year. So here you see some modern versions of the Viper. This was the first attempt, and I think it was very unsuccessful. As far as the look goes, they captured that vintage figure very well with the vest, the grenades, the short sleeves, all that sort of stuff, the high boots. But the feet were sculpted in such a way that he can never stand up straight. His toes are always pointing forward, which makes him very awkward. And he's got these removable goggles, which again don't catch on anything, and they're always falling off. I dropped them like 3 times just while I was trying to set this figure up for this review here. So very annoying. They really nailed it by the time they get to this figure here. He's got the reflective chrome face. Looks really great. They actually sculpted the goggles as part of the head. He's a little dusty here, but yeah, this is a really successful version of the Viper that was released kind of near the end of the modern era. And here you see it in a couple of different colors. So this one here, this was part of a convention set. It's got that chrome face again, which looks really cool on a red body. And then we've got a couple other color variations here too. All really cool. The Viper looks cool no matter how you paint it. So I really hope that this figure here gets released in all these color schemes and more. So I'm really excited. You can see how big this box is. You get the 6-inch figure plus the motorcycle. This is a character I did not expect to see in this line, at least so early on. Breaker is one of the original G.I. Joes from 1982. All those figures, other than with the exception of, like, say, Snake Eyes and Scarlet, who had their own unique looks, these guys were all just kind of standard military guys. They all had just plain green outfits, which I thought was awesome at the time. But G.I. Joe is getting so much brighter and more colorful and more, unique characters, ninjas and all this stuff, that in this day and age, I really didn't think they would dip into this well so early to give us some of the 1982 just drab military green characters. But I'm super stoked that we got Breaker. So I didn't really need the motorcycle, to be honest with you, just like Baroness. She came packaged with a motorcycle. It's cool. I like the Ram because this is a classic G.I. Joe vehicle as opposed to the new red kind of sports bike that they packaged with Baroness, which they just kind of came up out of thin air. So I don't mind getting this. It's kind of cool. If it had been sold on its own, I don't know if I would have bought it, just because I don't really have a whole lot of room to display vehicles. But as it is, if they're going to force me to buy a vehicle, I'd rather it be a cool little classic vehicle like this. So there's some cool artwork of Breaker on the motorcycle there. There he is. Looks like he's maybe popping a wheelie on the side there. So some more cool artwork. On the back, you get the same image you get for all the Cobra Island figures. So next up, we've got Breaker and the Ram motorcycle. So these guys are characters from 1982. Well, Breaker is. The Ram, I think, came out in 82, maybe 83. Both of these were figures. Well, this was a figure and a vehicle my brother Doug owned when we were kids. Although Breaker has always been a favorite of mine because we always thought the vintage figure looked like our dad. That's because my dad always had a brown beard growing up, and Breaker was the only G.I. Joe with a full brown beard. So we always really liked Breaker for that reason. So anyway, this is a pretty cool figure. He's the G.I. Joe communication specialist. So that's why he's got this helmet with these, antennas and this mouthpiece on here. So it looks like he's maybe a camera on this side. So I don't know. Maybe that's how a communication specialist, operates in this day and age, and maybe that's all he needs. But I like that they kept it very simple. Since the original Breaker came out in 82, his original design was very simple. It was very drab, military green. And I like that they didn't go nuts souping him up with all kinds of useless, sculpting and accessories. I like that he looks very basic military. And I hope we get other 1982 characters and they're treated similarly. So he's got this removable vest. But again, it's not too bulky. It's pretty simple. So I'll keep that on there. I like that. Now, the helmet is a little different. The visor is probably the most modern thing about him. It looks like some kind of douchey sunglasses. So yeah, you can choose to remove that if you want. And there's Breaker underneath. So he looks pretty cool, pretty classic. It would have been nice maybe if they gave us an optional helmet without the goggles on, that you could kind of capture that vintage look a little bit more. But yeah, I think this is a great looking figure. The vehicle, I'm not a vehicle guy, but I think this looks great. Again, this is very true to the vintage Ram motorcycle with the kind of, I don't know if you call this a sidecar, but a side-mounted gun and everything. Very cool. Like Baroness's motorcycle was much more modern and a little extreme, kind of a sports bike. But this here, this looks great. Very classic G.I. Joe. And so I don't know what to tell you about it. The wheels spin. He fits on there pretty good. There's not a whole lot of movement here as far as the handlebars go. Now the bike or the gun does come off inside. Well, the whole thing comes off. Bear with me. So yeah, you can take it off and you can just have the bike. And then I was going to say this whole thing comes off and then you can open that up. But as you can see, that opens up. And then the gun comes out, and this can actually be used as a handheld gun. I believe this is the same gun they used to give to the Amazon exclusive Roadblock. So yeah, even though Breaker doesn't have a gun in the package, you could give him this big crazy gun if you wanted to. So that's kind of a neat option. So anyway, very cool. Now let's move on quickly and take a look at some old Breaker figures. So here is the vintage Breaker from 1982. Actually, this one, yeah, this is from 82. And the way you can tell is because in 82, they didn't have the swivel arm battle grip. They're what you call straight arm G.I. Joes, so he can only bend his arm forward like that. They did release all the 82 figures again later with a swivel at the sleeve there, so then he could turn his arm inward and kind of touch his chest. So yeah, this is a really old G.I. Joe, 1982. And you can see there with the brown beard, that's the face that looks like my dad. My dad's beard has been white for quite some time now, but yeah, I still see my dad when I look at this thing. So as far as the helmet goes, you can see he's got that, the radio there, the mouthpiece. I think there's also supposed to be a cord that connects to his backpack, but I don't have that with me. So like many of my other vintage G.I. Joes, he's broken in half here, which is unfortunate, but he still holds together fairly well. This is another breaker that came out in the new sculpt era. So they basically took the same body. So from the neck down, this figure is actually the same as that one. It might not look it, but it is. They just, this time he's much brighter green, and you notice he doesn't have a beard. And that's because this version is based on the comic book, and in the comic book, Breaker did not have a beard. So I always associate Breaker with having the beard, but it's kind of cool to have the option of him not having it. And then I think we only got one version of Breaker in the modern era. I think it might have got released two separate ways. I think it was a single carded figure, and then it later came with a vehicle. But anyway, this is Breaker. Now, you can see here, this one's kind of weird in that he has a beard, but it's more like a 5 o'clock shadow on there. And he doesn't have a mustache. It's more like a chin strap. So that's kind of a weird look for him. As far as the design goes, again, he's very basic, military green. He's got his communications backpack with the plug, and his headset. This one is complete with the wire that plugs into the back of the backpack there, like so. And now this is a really cool thing that doesn't really work all that successfully, but it's a cool idea. In the comic books, the G.I. Joes were often chewing bubblegum, and they were shown blowing bubbles. So you would see G.I. Joes like Breaker with a big pink bubble in front of his face all the time. So what they did on this figure is they gave him bubblegum, and it just attaches to the end of the microphone. You can take that off. But if this is sitting properly and that's in front of his mouth, it kind of looks like he's blowing bubblegum. Unfortunately, this thing is usually sitting up in front of his eye, and it doesn't really sit properly. So a cool idea, not executed 100% accurate, but a neat idea nonetheless. So there you go. Those are my various Breaker figures, and I think this new one is pretty cool, and I'm pretty stoked to have him in the classified collection so early on. So the last and most recent Cobra Island figure to be released is Barbecue. And this is one I was really excited about because Barbecue was a childhood favorite of mine. This is the G.I. Joe team's firefighter, and he just had a really great design. I know what a firefighter is supposed to look like. I don't know if I've ever seen a real-life fireman look anything like this. Like the orange color, sure, that makes sense to me. The weaponry, he's got an axe. He's got like a hose there so he can spray some fire retardant material there. But this helmet, he looks like something like medieval with this knight helmet on. I don't know if that's based on anything real world. But I always loved this design. And this figure here is very accurate to the vintage figure from the 80s. Now, I don't have the 80s figure handy. I actually do have it. I just didn't really feel like digging it out of the bin. All my vintage G.I. Joes are in storage in bins because, like I said, they're all broken in two and everything like that. Now, all the other figures I've showed you, I had out and set aside because I've been planning on doing this video for a while. But Barbecue I just acquired not too long ago, just got them before Christmas, and I haven't gone back into my bins to dig out Barbecue for that, and I didn't feel like doing it. But trust me, the vintage Barbecue looks a lot like this figure. They have not changed much in the design at all. So yeah, Barbecue, great character. And this is one of those things where I wish the new G.I. Joes had the file cards. Not even so much for me, because unless they start adding new characters that need new personalities and stuff, then yeah, I wish there was file cards. But for these characters, I know these characters. I've been collecting these toys since they first came out in the 80s. It's been like 40 years. I've read the comic books. I've seen the cartoons. But if you were a kid going into a toy store and you just thought this guy looked cool, you would buy him, and you could probably piece together that he's a firefighter. But that's all you really know about him. What was so great about the file cards that came on the packages in the 80s and the 90s and the 2000s is that they told you a little bit about the character's personality. And you might not know it to look at him because he looks kind of intense in this medieval looking helmet. But his file card describes this guy as a party animal and said that he could open beer bottles with his teeth and pick up quarters with his ears. Like, he sounded like a real interesting character. And you just don't get those little bits of personality with these new figures since there's no description of the character at all. So that's kind of a bummer. Plus, these guys all have real names that the file cards always told us. And now I don't think it says the real name anywhere on the packaging. So again, kids wouldn't know what this guy's name is and everything. So yeah, they're really missing out. So I wish they would bring the file cards back. And I think they might be planning on it because they talked about at a recent reveal where they showed that a new Baroness was coming out, some of the new figures, that they hinted that they're going to start releasing some characters on vintage style cards. So if they do that, it would only make sense that they would have file cards with them as well. So anyway, great stuff here with Barbecue. So for accessories, you can see here he's got the kind of gun or hose, whatever you call it, and it's got the hose that attaches, brings it right back to the backpack so he can spray foam or whatever. And he's got an axe that goes right back to the vintage figure. He's always had an axe so he can break down doors and rescue people. This one here, he's got 2 axes. I'm not sure if this is where you're supposed to store this one, but it kind of clips on his leg here, so that's where I've decided to keep it. Seems like kind of a dangerous thing to have an axe dangling from you like that, but regardless, I guess that's what he does. And he's got a little holster there where I guess you can put this gun here, but it makes it a little difficult with the hose. You probably have to detach the hose to get that to tuck in there. So yeah, really cool figure. Love this guy. Really excited about him. And another great thing about this figure is I really didn't want to deal with the stress of chasing him down like I've had to do on all these other Cobra Island figures. And as soon as this figure was announced, somebody on Facebook on one of the G.I. Joe groups I'm on tipped me off to say you can pre-order these figures from a website in the UK, and they added the link on Facebook. I clicked on the link. It sounded like it was just like a toy shop or a comic book store or something in the UK, but I bought this figure. They sent it to me, and it arrived quicker than most of the toys I buy in the United States. I order them from the States. They take about a month to get to me. This guy I had in my hands in like less than 2 weeks after ordering him from the UK, and it was before almost anybody else had him. So yeah, this figure, if it eventually shows up at Toys R Us here in Canada, it's probably months down the road. So the fact that I was able to get this guy so early on and not have to stress about chasing him down or paying crazy amount of prices to get him, yeah, really stoked. So anyway, let's take a look at some other barbecues before we move on. So there were 3 different barbecues released in the vintage toy line. I had the original one, which looked like this. And, they did not change his look up very much in the modern era, nor have they changed it up much for the classified line. So this is the classic barbecue look that everybody knows and loves and associates with the character. They did give him a really weird redesign for his 3rd look in the vintage line, but I think it's best if we just forget all about that. There was no barbecue figure included in the new sculpt years of the early 2000s, which is kind of odd. But in the modern era that began in 2007, we got 4 different variations of him. So again, it started with the classic orange design. Then I think this one came next, which was kind of a weird new look with this blue helmet and then this green camo outfit. And it didn't really seem to fit with, a firefighter or whatever. But what I think that they were trying to do with this figure is make an homage to the Slaughter's Marauders version that came out in the vintage line, which was blue, green, and brown. So this was kind of a nod to that. And then we got this yellow and black version that came out as part of the Rise of Cobra movie line. So even though Barbecue was not featured in the movie or any of the related source material, I don't think, like the comic books or anything, they just re-released the orange figure in these more, I guess what they think are real world colors, because the Rise of Cobra figures were mostly black and kind of real world, I guess. And then the last one we got came from the one of the convention sets put out by the figures of the G.I. Joe Collectors Club. And this one here is a direct homage to the Slaughter's Marauders version. So rather than just hint to it like they did with that version, this one here is straight up, these are the colors that came on Barbecue version 2. So it kind of makes that one seem a little redundant, but still, Barbecue's a cool character. It's a cool sculpt, a cool design, so I don't mind having this guy in as many versions as they want to give me. So those were my G.I. Joe classified figures, but before I wrap up this video, I'm going to throw in one extra G.I. Joe review This is not a Cobra Island figure. This was kind of a deluxe G.I. Joe figure that was available at regular retail. I just never had a chance to review it previously, so I'm just going to tag it on to the end of this video. So I'm going to show you some in-the-box footage that I shot a little while ago, and then we'll do a kind of a fresh review of the figure outside of the box. So here is Commando Snake Eyes and Timber inside of the box. So nice big window on the front so you can see the figure and all of his various weapons, as well as Timber and the alternate head. And then we've got some knives and stuff over here. So a really great looking figure. Very eager to get this guy opened up. There's some really cool artwork of Snake Eyes there. And around the sides as well, with Timber down at the bottom. Then on the back, we get that same image we've seen on all G.I. Joe classified packaging since the beginning. But I do like how they keep expanding this. So every time a new figure comes out, they add on to it. So I kind of wish I had one of the Wave 1 figures to show you. But originally it was just like, you know, the 8 figures in the middle. But as they've added like Flint and Lady J and Gung Ho, and you see Firefly, the Viper, Major Bludd. And on this side here, you just see that it's labeled as figure 30. And then you've got all these little icons here that we've seen on all the packaging. It varies depending on the character. I think you have to go online to find out the significance of all these and what they mean. It's a poor substitute for the file cards that the old toys used to have. But at least it's something, I suppose. So here is Commando Snake Eyes and Timber outside of the box. And I'm really excited to get Commando Snake Eyes. That's my preferred look. It's a close call. I really like Commando look and Ninja look. But the Commando look is the first, like the original design of Snake Eyes back in 1982. That's the version I had. And then when he was re-released in 85 as a Ninja, my brother Doug got that version. So that's the look that he usually has in pop culture now with the visor and everything. But I've always really been drawn to the Commando look. So this is a pretty successful figure in that they have that Commando design mask. You know, it looks kind of like, you know, somebody might wear playing paintball or something. But it's very much Commando Snake Eyes. And everything about the design here is very cool. He's got the kind of knit sweater there. He has quite a few guns. You might have noticed from me showing you inside the box. So I've got him holding his kind of classic Uzi here. I've got him holding this, I don't know, another machine gun here. I think there was another gun laying around here somewhere, but that I don't have him holding. Then he's got a knife that's sheathed on his leg. Then he's got another gun here. So yeah, he's well armed anyway. And as far as the sculpting goes, like, very cool. I'm not sure how many of the parts are reused. I'm sure some of them are. But he looks quite different from the other Snake Eyes we've got, which is important. Because if you're going to make me buy another Snake Eyes, I don't want them all to look identical. So if we do a little comparison of just the Snake Eyes that we've got in classified. So here's the Wave 1 Snake Eyes. So he's got the ninja visor on his face. Now technically there was another version of Snake Eyes which I did not get. They released this version just slightly repainted. For example, you see that little red mark above his visor. They got rid of that, and I think they might have tweaked a couple of other things, but it wasn't different enough for me to warrant buying it. But I do have this same figure in a different paint scheme here. This was the deluxe version of Snake Eyes. So you can see here he's got some browns and some silvers, and he came with a whole bunch of extra weapons, but he's basically the same figure as that. And then we've got the movie version, which, you know, based on that pretty terrible movie that came out last year. But again, you can see the design is still pretty similar to what we got there. He's got that ninja visor on. That's kind of Snake Eyes as most people know him. But yeah, this Commando look, I'm really glad that we got that update and pretty early on into the G.I. Joe line. Now, some people might be surprised that this figure did not rank on my best of 2021, because I know it topped a couple lists of other toy guys that I follow on YouTube, and pretty much everybody I saw that talked about this figure absolutely loved it. And I can't really explain why it kind of misses the mark for me a little bit. Like, I think it's cool. I'm glad we got it. The fact that he comes with his wolf timber, that's great. He's got new parts, and I should love this thing, but I don't know. Maybe it's because I've got, this is my 4th Snake Eyes in the span of like a year and a half collecting this line. It just feels a little bit like overkill. Maybe it was because it came out right around that movie that was extremely disappointing. And not only is this my 4th 6-inch Snake Eyes, but it's probably about my 30 or 40th Snake Eyes figure in my collection. This is just a character I'm a little burnt out on. And I think lastly, I feel this commando look was done better in the smaller scale. Now, I don't say that too often about these figures. Like, I love a lot of those like 3 3/4 inch figures, but I think when you blow them up into the 6-inch scale, it allows you room to add more detail. Such was the case with Firefly, with Major Bludd, with Beachhead, all that stuff. But with Snake Eyes, I think they actually did a better version of this figure in the modern era at the 4-inch scale, which we'll get into that in a minute. So first I want to take a second to talk about timber. So this is Snake Eyes' Wolf Companion, and this is the best timber we've ever gotten. Like you can see, it's got all these joints, so he's articulated. You can kind of swivel his hips, his neck. Let's see, I don't know if that moves a whole lot. It turns a little bit here, but not a whole lot. Then his head is ball jointed, so that can look up and down and side to side. The legs, so not only do they all move that way, but then he's got like knee joints and then the ankle joints. So multiple articulations, so you can have this guy kind of hopping up or, running, whatever you want to do. It's really cool that you've got this much articulation on an animal companion, because most of the animal companions, including Timber, were not even articulated at all back in the vintage line. And besides all the guns that Snake Eyes got, Timber also got an alternate head. So that's really cool that you can give him this kind of calm demeanor, or you can give him his snarling attack face, which is really cool. So before we do the Snake Eyes comparisons, let's maybe do the Timber comparisons. So this is the very first Timber that we got with the 1985 Snake Eyes. So you can see here he's just one piece of plastic. He's got that angry kind of face, but no paint on his nose or his eyes or anything. He's just a hunk of white plastic. So that was fine because that's what we were used to getting. Then even in the modern era, so they started adding more paint. So you can see here Timber's got, his eyes are painted yellow and he's got some different shades of gray, but he's still just a solid hunk of plastic. There was no additional detail to him. Here's another version of Timber from the modern era, painted a little bit differently. He's a little more white than gray here, but at least they painted his nose and the inside of his mouth and his eyes and stuff. But it's the same sculpt as this. I've got a few different Timbers from the modern era, but this is probably my favorite. So this is the first time they ever articulated Timber. His body is still just a solid hunk, but his head is articulated. So you can move his head up and down and side to side there. So there you go. So that's pretty cool. But yeah, even then you can see how far we've come from this to having the alternate heads with all the articulation. It's really great. Like even the bottom of his paws are painted. Like really cool stuff. The scars on his eyes and his nose looks like he's been through some battles. Just very cool stuff. So I really like this Timber. So now let's do some Commando Snake Eyes comparisons. So this here is the original 1982 Snake Eyes. Now you'll notice his arms are kind of blue. That's because both of my guys' thumbs broke off, and in order to give him thumbs back, I took some arms off of, I think, a Cobra Commander figure, and I painted them black. I did that back when I was a kid, so the paint is worn off, and the arms aren't quite accurate, but otherwise, he's in pretty good shape. And yeah, so he's got that look with the goggles and then the breathing holes on his mask. But this is how he looked. Originally, he was solid black. It was really just a way for Hasbro to save money on paint apps, but it kind of became iconic with this solid black figure. So it looks pretty cool, and you can see how it carried over into this one, even though they've definitely kind of made the design a little bit more complicated. Now this is not a Commando Snake Eyes, but this is Snake Eyes version 2. So after we get that original one in 82, 83, then in 85 we get the first Ninja Snake Eyes with the visor. So the reason I'm bringing him up, and by the way, you see he's all broken up too. Missing a thumb, you know, the crotch is broken off here, so he's in pretty bad shape. But what's interesting about him is this is the first time we were introduced to Timber. This is the figure that came with Timber. So it seems kind of odd to me that they've released 4 different Snake Eyes, you know, in the ninja style with no wolf, and now they give us our first Commando Snake Eyes, and they give us Timber, which that the wolf was never associated really with that look. Anyway, just a minor thing that's kind of interesting, but anyway, let's move on. Now, after the ninja visor was introduced in '85, most later interpretations of Snake Eyes had the visor. So when the new sculpt years came around in the early 2000s, this is the first version of Snake Eyes we got with the visor. You can see he's all ninja'd out there. And most versions in the new sculpt era had that visor. However, this is a figure that came out in 2004 during that time. And this is actually just a straight redo of that vintage figure. Now, you'll see here, rather than just solid black, they painted some grays and some silver on him. But this is just an exact reproduction of that figure I've got in the back there from 1982. Now, in the modern line, there were literally dozens of variations of Snake Eyes. Most of them were the ninja version. Now, you see here, these are the ones that I have that are probably, that you could say are based on his Commando look. So this was the original modern era Snake Eyes from 2007. So I think this is a really nice figure. A lot of these 2007 figures did not age very well, but I still think this guy's pretty great. And then they repainted that figure. This one here is to emulate the scene in the cartoon when Snake Eyes got radiated, and he's got this radioactive material in his hands. So they've used this like translucent plastic to show that he's got radiation sickness. I think that works pretty well. And then this one here is painted blue to kind of capture the look from the cartoon, where Snake Eyes was always colored blue. And then this one here is kind of a modern take. This one I think is from the cartoon Resolute. So you can see it still carries over that, you know, paintball helmet design, but they've kind of upped it, made it a little bit more modern, and that's a pretty cool figure as well. But as far as me saying that they made a better version of this figure in the modern line, that would go to this version here. So this figure was released a couple of times. I think the first time was during the Pursuit of Cobra line, then again during the 30th anniversary or the 50th anniversary, I can't recall. And then this same figure was released more recently as part of the Retro line. Now, one of the cool things about this figure is he actually came with 2 different heads, so you could choose to display him with the visor or with the Commando style head. I've obviously went with the Commando style head. What's kind of unfortunate is when you get the retro version, he only has the ninja head as opposed to the Commando head. But you can see how well this works. He's got that really nice Commando head sculpt, not overly complicated. Then he's got, you know, the knit sweater, and then he's got the web gear here. Lots of detail, lots of weapons on him. He's got the Uzi. He's got a backpack with some swords there. So he still retains some of his ninja elements, even though this is mostly his Commando look. And yeah, I just think this is a really great figure. So when they gave us this, I think they missed the mark a little bit in that they didn't do as good a job as they did on this one. Like, I would have liked to see the cable knit sweater kind of throughout instead of this armored bit here. I don't know. It's kind of hard to say what misses the mark for me on this figure, but I think it's really that it's just still overshadowed by this figure, which I love. So, still a great figure though. I'm glad we got Commando Snake Eyes in the classified line. And yeah, I should wrap this up because this video has gone hella long. Okay, so that was my G.I. Joe Cobra Island exclusive figures, as well as my deluxe Snake Eyes and Timber review. So I hope you enjoyed it. Please, if you have any questions or comments, write them down there. And if you enjoyed the video, please make sure to, like and subscribe to the channel. And yeah, all that stuff, very much appreciated. So I'll be back soon with another video. I think I have one last video with some 2021 figures that I'd like to show you. Before then I can have a fresh start and really start rolling into my new 2022 figures. So yeah, I will see you again soon. Until then, ciao.